Dr. Alexander was a renowned therapist known for his unconventional methods. He had a unique ability to connect with his clients on a deeper level, tapping into their subconscious minds and helping them overcome their deepest fears and insecurities. However, he had a secret side to him, one that he kept hidden from the world. One day, a new client walked into his office. Her name was Emily, a beautiful woman in her late 20s, struggling with anxiety and low self-esteem. Dr. Alexander could sense something different about her, something that intrigued him. He decided to take a chance and try his secret method on her. As they sat down for their first session, Dr. Alexander began to ask Emily about her past, her relationships, and her deepest desires. He listened intently, his eyes locked onto hers, his voice low and soothing. Emily felt a strange sense of comfort in his presence, a feeling she had never experienced before. Dr. Alexander then began to guide Emily into a state of relaxation, his voice becoming hypnotic. He told her to close her eyes and take deep breaths, to let go of all her worries and fears. Emily felt a wave of calm wash over her, her mind becoming clear and focused. Dr. Alexander continued to speak, his words becoming more suggestive. He told Emily that she was beautiful, that she deserved to be loved and cherished. He suggested that she allow herself to feel pleasure, to let go of her inhibitions, and embrace her primal desires. Emily felt a strange sensation in her body, a tingling sensation that began to spread from her toes to her fingertips. She felt a sudden urge to touch herself, to explore her own body. Dr. Alexander watched her intently, his heart racing as he saw his words' effect on her. Over the next few sessions, Dr. Alexander continued to guide Emily deeper into a state of hypnosis. He would suggest more and more explicit things, pushing her boundaries and helping her to embrace her primal desires. Emily found herself becoming more and more aroused with each session, her body craving the pleasure that Dr. Alexander was promising her. One day, Dr. Alexander suggested that Emily allow him to touch her, to guide her through a sensual experience that would bring her to the edge of ecstasy. Emily hesitated at first, but the desire within her was too strong to resist. She nodded her consent, her heart pounding in her chest. Dr. Alexander began to touch Emily, his hands moving slowly and sensually over her body. He whispered sweet nothings into her ear, his voice sending shivers down her spine. Emily moaned softly, her body responding to his touch. As Dr. Alexander continued to touch her, Emily felt herself slipping deeper into a state of hypnosis. She was no longer in control of her own body, her mind completely submerged in the pleasure that Dr. Alexander was providing her. She felt a wave of ecstasy wash over her, her body shaking with pleasure as she experienced the most intense orgasm of her life. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Alexander continued to seduce Emily, pushing her further and further into a state of primal desire. He would take her to the edge of ecstasy during their sessions, leaving her desperate for more. Emily became completely dependent on Dr. Alexander, her mind and body craving the pleasure that he provided her. One day, Dr. Alexander suggested that Emily allow him to take complete control of her mind and body, to guide her through a sensual experience that would be more intense than anything she had ever experienced before. Emily hesitated at first, but the desire within her was too strong to resist. She nodded her consent, her heart pounding in her chest. Dr. Alexander began to speak, his voice becoming more hypnotic than ever before. He told Emily that she was his, that she belonged to him completely. He suggested that she allow him to take her to new heights of pleasure, to experience a level of ecstasy that she had never thought possible. Emily felt herself slipping deeper into a state of hypnosis, her mind completely submerged in the pleasure that Dr. Alexander was promising her. She felt a wave of ecstasy wash over her, her body shaking with pleasure as she experienced the most intense orgasm of her life. As the orgasm subsided, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that she was completely under Dr. Alexander's control, but she didn't care. She had never felt like this before. This feeling, this overwhelming pleasure, was all-consuming. As their sessions became more frequent and the intimacy deepened, a subtle unease began to stir within Emily. The euphoria, the all-encompassing pleasure, was still present, but a small voice of doubt started to whisper in the recesses of her mind. She began to question the boundaries they were crossing, the control she had ceded to Dr. Alexander. Was this therapy, or something far more insidious? One day, after an particularly intense session, Emily found herself unable to shake the feeling of vulnerability. As she dressed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, her eyes glazed with a haunted look, her body bearing the marks of their shared intimacy. The pleasure was still there, but the price felt too steep, the cost of her freedom. She attempted to voice her concerns to Dr. Alexander during their next session, but he skillfully deflected her worries. He dismissed her fears as mere anxieties, a residual effect of her past traumas. He reassured her that he was helping her, that she was on the path to healing and wholeness. Emily, despite her growing doubts, found herself swayed by his practiced manipulation, her resolve wavering. The cycle of pleasure and doubt continued. Emily, torn between her desire and her growing fears, sought solace in the sessions, even as they began to feel like a trap. The outside world began to shrink as Dr. Alexander became the center of her universe. She lost contact with friends and family, her entire existence revolving around the intoxicating pull of their sessions. One day, a moment of clarity pierced the fog. During a particularly intense session, as Dr. Alexander was guiding her towards another orgasm, Emily suddenly found herself detached, observing the scene from a distance. She saw herself, a vulnerable woman, completely at his mercy. She saw Dr. Alexander, the master manipulator, reveling in his control. This realization was like a cold splash of water. The hypnotic spell shattered. She pushed him away, her body stiffening with revulsion. She demanded that he stop, that he release her from his control. Dr. Alexander, initially taken aback by her sudden defiance, quickly attempted to regain control. He tried to soothe her, to reassure her, to pull her back into the familiar embrace of pleasure. But Emily's resolve had hardened. She was finally ready to fight for her freedom, to reclaim the parts of herself she had lost. Emily, fueled by a newfound courage, spent the next few days meticulously planning her escape and her revenge. She reached out to a trusted friend, a lawyer, and slowly began to piece together the evidence of Dr. Alexander's unethical practices. The sessions had been recorded, his words, his actions, the proof that he was abusing his position of authority and violating her trust. Armed with this evidence, Emily confronted Dr. Alexander in his office, her voice steady, her eyes locked with his. The air crackled with tension. She laid out her accusations, her voice filled with righteous anger. She described the manipulation, the exploitation, the way he had preyed upon her vulnerabilities. She announced that she was reporting him to the authorities. Dr. Alexander, caught off guard, tried to deny her accusations, to downplay his actions, to paint himself as a victim of her hysteria. But Emily held her ground, her evidence undeniable. The man, who had once held her in the palm of his hand, was now facing the unraveling of his carefully constructed world. The aftermath was a storm. Dr. Alexander's career was destroyed. His license was revoked, and his reputation tarnished. He faced criminal charges and a long, protracted legal battle. Emily, however, embarked on a journey of healing and recovery. It was a difficult process, filled with therapy and self-reflection, but she found strength in her support system, her newfound independence, and the knowledge that she had fought back. She made it her mission to warn other women about therapists like Dr. Alexander, to raise awareness of the dangers of unethical practices, and to help others who had been victims of similar abuse. Emily, once a victim of manipulation, had become a symbol of resilience and empowerment, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Though the scars of her experience would always remain, she emerged from the darkness, forever changed, but ultimately free.